Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This morning's learning is sponsored by Chayi and Rabbi Hirsch Chin to commemorate the seventh yortzeit of Chayi's mother, Adel Vita Bas Harav Yoel Zichron Livracha, on the 19th of Iyar. Thank the Chins very much, and it should be a merit for the Neshama. Chapter 25, verse 39. Chapter 25, verse 39. If your brother becomes impoverished with you and is sold to you, lo savod bo avodas avet, you shouldn't have him do demeaning type of labors. In other words, there's two types of there could be two different types of status for a slave. There was slavery in the Torah. There absolutely was slavery in the Torah. All slaves had to be treated with certain basic respect, but there are things you were allowed to ask a non-Jewish slave to do that you weren't allowed to ask a Jewish slave to do. And the key really seems to be the word in this verse, achicha, your brother. It's this is a person, he's selling himself to you, but even so, you have to see him as your brother, and you don't have a right to have him do uniquely demeaning things. Okay, and by the way, he may not be your slave past the Jubilee year. There's an idea that when it comes to the seventh year, he's freed unless he wants to stay. But even if he wants to stay, when the Jubilee year comes, he's not allowed to stay anymore. And now jumping ahead to verse 42, the people of Klal Yisrael, my servants, I took them out of Egypt. Lo yimachru mimkeres aved. They may not be sold like another slave. Why not? I mean, God just is telling me we can't do it. Why not? Sforno pasuk membeis ki avodayhem. Afav pi shebeshvil sheholach zev v'kana adon la'atzmo hayroi l'chol shibud. I mean, it's very logical. This guy knocked on my door. He said, "I'm trying to figure out how to pay whatever I need to pay. I want to sell myself as your slave." I didn't force him. I didn't take him captive. He did this of his own initiative. And therefore, you might very well say, as long as he understood what he was getting himself into, I can do with him whatever I want. No. He's not allowed to fully sell himself as a slave. In other words, he's not allowed to eternally sell himself as a slave to you. When the Jubilee year comes, he has to leave your slavery because it's not fully up to him. God says he works for me. It's just an interesting thing to think about. It's something that's relevant in many aspects of our lives. I think the thing that is most relevant to us today has to do with medical halacha questions. Of course, there are many aspects that the desire of the patient sets the standard, but there are certain issues in medical halacha that you're just not allowed to do. And one could pose the question, well, it's my body, isn't it? It's my life, isn't it? The answer is not exactly. We believe that God gives us a soul, and whatever time we have in this world is a gift from God, not a gift given to us, a charge given to us. So in a sense, it's a similar idea. The Sforno was saying that the pasuk is telling us it's not up to him if he's going to be your slave forever. I don't want him. God doesn't want him to be that. So interesting. Okay, moving on to verse 47. This gets a little trickier. Verse 47. So there's a non-Jew living among you, and the non-Jew is doing well. And you have a Jew in your midst who has become impoverished. And the Jew becomes sold as a slave to a non-Jew in the neighborhood. Okay, it's a very interesting mitzvah. And again, presumably this Jew did it of his own initiative, of his own will. This wasn't that he was taken hostage or something. He came and he said, I want to be your slave. I need money, you'll pay me. Verse 48, Achareinim kar, after he is sold to the non-Jew, geula tielo, there needs to be redemption for him. Echad me'achav yigolen, one of his brethren needs to redeem him. Whereas when a Jew sells him or herself to another Jew, then it's fine. If there are rules the Jewish master has to observe. and it can't be for eternity, but that's fine. On the other hand, when a Jew sells himself to a non-Jew, then Klal Yisrael has to buy him out. Klal Yisrael has to get him out of there. And first we say, verse 49, O dodo, o ven dodo yigalenu, o misher b'sarov mishpachto yigalenu, o isiga yado vinigal. So that firstly, it's the responsibility of his relatives to try to figure out how to get him out of there. And the idea would be that they would call up the master. They would say, we understand that you paid such and such money for this person as a slave. We want to buy you out. And then let the person have their freedom. Okay. If you look back at 48, the wording in the pasuk is very interesting. After he's sold, there has to be redemption for him. Well, it's going to be really hard to buy him out before he's sold, right? I mean, the case is that he was sold. So say, jump right into someone needs to buy him out. Kli Yakar, pasuk memches, acharei nimkar gulat yalo, v'chisal kadatach, shigalo kodem shu nimkar. Do you think the pshat is that he should be redeemed before he's sold? Ma tamud lomer acharei nimkar. What's meant by saying it should be after he's sold? Ki yesh lomar midika amar lo yerdenu beferach leinecha. Later on in the psukim, it says that you should not see him being worked hard. In a torturous way. I might have thought that that's the concern. You know, if he'd be sold to a Jew, we believe the Jew wouldn't be cruel to him. But if he's sold to a non-Jew, maybe the non-Jew will work him too hard. That's why you might have thought that you have a mitzvah to redeem him. Vim came, Amtin. And if that's the rationale, it's not a crazy thing to say. Listen, the price that the master is charging is a lot of money. Let me see if this Jewish slave is being worked hard or not. If he's not being worked particularly hard, maybe he'll be okay. He made a decision. He sold himself. It's a lot of money. The guy's not being tortured. Fine. Kamash Malan. Therefore, the pasuk comes to teach you. Should take that immediately after he's sold, even if he hasn't worked a day for this fellow, you are obligated to buy him out. The big concern here is actually not even that he'll be treated inappropriately by the non-Jewish master. It's that we're concerned that he's going to live in a non-Jewish environment for all this time, and it might negatively impact him. V'yomar, he might say, "Oh, Rabbi Megala Rayos, Shabbos, Afani Kaboso." He might see all kinds of conduct in the home in which he's a slave. It's not in step with Jewish practice, and he might say, "Well, when in Rome, do as the Romans." So therefore, that's what we're concerned about, and therefore you should try to get him out as quickly as possible. Okay, so that's just, I think, an interesting shot from the Kli Yakar. Let's go on now to chapter 26, verse 1. Chapter 26, verse 1. Lo sasu lachem elilim. Do not make for yourselves idols. Ufesa lumatzeva lo sakimu lachem. And do not establish monuments for yourselves. Do not place a stone upon which you should bow. Ki ani Hashem Elokecha. Because I am Hashem your God. Verse 2, Ashab Sosai to Tishmor Mitashiti Ra'u. Observe my Shabbos, have reverence for my sanctuary, Ani Hashem, I am Hashem. It's hard to argue with these two psukim, but it's also hard to understand what they're doing here. I mean, all of these things are things that have been discussed in the Torah. Why this? Why anything? Rashi on Pasuk Aleph. Lo sasu lochem elivim. Do not make idols. Kineged zeh hanimkar l'nachri. This is actually addressing the person we were talking about a few psukim ago, the Jew who was sold to a non-Jew. Shelo yomar, he shouldn't say, Hoel v'Rabbi megala arayos afani kamoso. Hoel v'Rabbi oved avodah zara afani kamoso. Hoel v'Rabbi mechal Shabbos afani kamoso. So similar to what we said here, these are psukim of chizuk, psukim of inspiration for the Jew who's been sold to a non-Jew who hasn't been redeemed for whatever reason that may be. So we remind him, don't slip on these specific halachos. And presumably the halachos being pinpointed are the things that are most likely to be different in a non-Jew's home than in a Jew's home, or at least those things with greater temptation, maybe. Okay, sforno on pasuk aleph, lo sasu lachem, af al pi she tishtabdu. Even if you find yourself in servitude, don't do these things. V'zesh lo yitu, kamo shizkiru zal shatau rabim be'es hagola she'amru l'neviim eved shemachro rabo the isha shagir shabala klum yesh lozel ze klum. So the Sforno says we're actually on a different tack here. We're not really talking about the Jew that's been sold to a non-Jew, but we're talking about something similar. We're talking about the Jew that's in Galus, the Jew that's in exile. And you might, as we have the charge from the Nevi'im in general, that even though you're in exile, don't stop, don't let up, keep the mitzvos. And says the Sforno, there might be a very strong rationale why the Jew who's in exile feels that I'm exempt. Because if a slave is sold by his master, does the master have a right to tell the slave what to do anymore? If a spouse gets divorced, does their spouse have a right to say, I'd like you to do this, I'd like you to do that? Of course not. So no hard feelings, but God exiled me. So God sent me off. So maybe it's not his place to tell me what to do anymore. Nevertheless, says Sforno, I am Hashem, your God. That the point is, I'm still your God. I've sent you into exile because you need the atonement. I've sent you into exile because you need to grow, whatever it is. But I still consider myself your God. It's an interesting way to think about the psukim. Interesting to think about. Now, next Sforno on the next pasuk is Shab Sosai Tishmor, observe my Shabbases. Af b'mei galuschem me'eretz avosechem, similar to how we were discussing the last pasuk. Even when you find yourself in exile, no longer in the land of Israel, still observe my Shabbos. Umikdashi tira'u, have reverence for my sanctuary. Hamakomos hamakudashim achar churban habayis. I mean, if we're talking about a Jew in exile, what is he talking about when he says, have reverence for my sanctuary? What sanctuary? He's in exile. So says the Sforno, we're talking about the places that are holy after the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed. And what are they? Behain bate knesios, bate midrashos. Those are shuls and study halls. Afal pi shecharav Beis HaMikdash. Even though the temple no longer exists, we need to channel our reverence for God as felt in the temple to how we conduct ourselves in a place of prayer or in a place of Torah study. Ka'amro, v'ahi lahem l'mikdash ma'at. The pasuk in Yechezkel talks about how there will be for them a mini sanctuary. V'yom Ruzal, elu bate knesios, bate midrashos. So the rabbis teach in Maseches Megillah that this refers to shuls and study halls. It's just something to think about. Easier said than done, but imagine that on some level a person walks into a shul. When we say shul, we don't mean the whole building. We don't mean the social. We mean the area of prayer. Person walks into a place of prayer. It's like I'm walking into the Beis HaMikdash. We discussed the Sforno regarding why the Jew can't sell himself eternally to another Jew. We discussed the Kli Yakar regarding the mitzvah of redeeming the Jew from the non-Jew. And we discussed Rashi and the Sforno on these psukim right at the end regarding who's being addressed with these very basic mitzvahs being told.